Just okay. So this webinar is just about working with your team and how to start coaching and developing teams a little bit better. My background, Andrew Russo. I'm a business mechanic with PKF in Adelaide, and I work with business owners in relation to helping them improve and develop their businesses. And I do that through a range of online coaching, facilitation of management meetings, planning, and so on. Today, I wanted to look at coaching and people, because we've found over the last few years that this area of training people within organisations and so on has changed a fair bit. And the old days of sending people off to courses and giving them that sort of training has started to disappear a little bit, because what they found was that they went off to training, but that training was never really used internally. It was never applied properly to what was going on. And what we've found is that coaching needs to be related to, or the training needs to have that coaching behind it to support it and to drive it. So we really need to start looking at coaching. And we found that a number of organisations, when you ask them about coaching, they say it's very critical to their organisation. But when you really get into seeing what's actually happening, and people are in the organisation saying they don't get enough coaching. So how do you then start to do this in a much more positive way and effective way within the organisation? So studies completed by the American Society for Training Development showed that a return on investment of 5 times the cost of coaching, so that the productivity increased by 88% when coaching was combined with the training, compared to only 22%, which was just from the training alone. So it's really important that you start to get this coaching involved into your organizations. Steve Vamos, the ex-CEO of Apple, once said that he needed to shift from being a controller of everything to a know-all to being someone who listened, learned, supported people around him. And he said it was like a light that went on for him when he realised this, and that his role was not the star player, but to coach and help was the one that he had to do. And I encourage this through all business owners to become that head coach of that business. So the traditional approaches to losing impact, and the old performance measurements and the way people did performance reviews and so on is now disappearing, and there's a far more approach that's related around training, coaching, and building. So when the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer, says, what happens if we invest in developing our people and they leave? The CEO's role should be, what happens if we don't and they stay? Because I think it's far more important that you develop people, and maybe they won't leave if they are being developed, as against people, if you don't spend that money, you don't develop them, they're probably likely to go, and you'll lose a hell of a lot more money that way than you will by developing your people. So it's really important that you start investing in the people within your organisations. When we look at staff engagement, there was some research that was done that showed that there were 4 areas of the engagement that was looked at. And what they found that in this first area of the engagement, where it was really about leadership and staff morale, and this was the strongest area that was coming up with businesses in relation to getting employees engaged. It was a really solid foundation to build on, because if you had a lack of faith in leadership and poor staff morale, it really takes a long time to fix that up. So getting that right initially was really important. The second area, strongest area, was in relation to job satisfaction and performance reward in here. And again, these areas were important, but what they showed, and we'll go to box 2 and 3, was that with box 2 and 3 being low, it was very hard to really get that second area going strongly. And if we could get the 3 and 4 going, it really improved and built on 2 and 1. So in box 3, what we're looking at there is basically just communication. Communication, collaboration, and understanding, commitment to goals. This is across the organisation, where's the organisation going? What are we trying to achieve? How do we work together to get here, to get where we want to go, and so on. It's really important about letting people know what's going on, what your visions are, where you're trying to get to. And the fourth weakest area down here was in relation to training, mentoring, role clarity, so that people will start clearly understanding their responsibilities and have been equipped with the skills to perform those responsibilities with confidence. And this was really a foundation area that supported the others, but found to be very weak in many organisations. But to get this sort of change happening in an organisation, you have to change. It has to be a commitment to change the way you do things. And in getting change, there are three key ingredients to change. The first one is that everyone in the organisation has to be ready for change. There has to be the leadership support. There has to be obviously a need to change. There's got to be something in it for everybody. There's got to be a very clear change process, and there's got to be confidence that this is going to happen and going to work. Together with that, there's got to be the capability within the organisation to be able to do it, the capability of the organisation to be actually implement it, to be able to offer that support and coaching and so on, and have the people with the right skills and ability to do it. And then alongside that, there has to be a belief that it's going to happen. People in the organisation have to believe that there's going to be a result as a result of doing this. And if there's no belief, then the rest of it's just a waste of time. So you've got to really look at all of those things and say, okay, if I'm going to change the way we're doing things, if I've got to change the way I need to get staff engagement in this organisation, then I've got to really start to get all of these things going within the organisation to make it happen. So what I want to look at is just to give you look at some tools. Now, if you go into your GoToWebinar box, there's an area down there with handouts, and I've put in there 4 handouts that you can download that relate to these sort of tools and can help you. If you can't download them, just let me know afterwards, and I'll make sure that I send them on to you. But they are in that handout area, and you can download. So the first tool I want to look at is this coaching skills matrix. And what we're looking at here is saying, how do we look at the skills within each of my people, and where's their enthusiasm in relation to what they're doing? Because if I've got someone who's very high skilled but no enthusiasm, then the issue with them is not so much supervision and instruction and coaching. It's more about how do I motivate them. Whereas against someone who's got high skills and high enthusiasm, then there's someone I can really trust, and I don't probably have to put as much into them as I would with someone who's got low skills and high enthusiasm. Then I've got to get in there, instruct, coach, train, and so on. So you need to sit down with each of your people and review your team. Look at each one of them in this regard. Where do they sit? And having done that and scored them on the matrix, then be able to develop the strategies that you can adopt to help those particular people. Whereas I think in the past with a lot of organisations, they had a standard coaching, standard training program. It applied to everybody and everyone was treated the same. But people are different, and they need to be, and you need to understand where do they sit in this coaching skills matrix. What are the things you need to do with each of them to help them, to move them to where you want them to be. The next is in relation to employee engagement. And we need to understand and start to see how people perceive their positions and their jobs and how are they actually behaving at work. So we're looking at behaviours down here from a destructive, neutral, constructive point of view as against the perceptions we think they have of their jobs, whether they're negative, indifferent or very positive to their jobs. And again, by understanding where they sit, destructive but positive, then they're a bit of a brat within the organisation. So how would you handle that person and make sure you get the most out of them? As against someone who's negative and destructive and very much the saboteur, what do you need to do? Do you need to try and move them out, or are they that way because of other things that you've looked at in relation to their enthusiasm, or we'll look at something else in relation to job demands and so on in a minute. that says, well, where are they, and can I actually move them to somewhere else, or can't I? So again, sitting down and looking at each person, plot each team member, where do they sit, develop the strategies as to what needs to be done to move them to where you want them to be. The next one is really looking at the demand position of their job and the resources they have available. So if we're looking again at someone who's in a very high demand job, but the resources that we're giving them are very low, then they're obviously under high strain with very little motivation in relation to their job. Whereas against someone who's got maybe high demands, but they've got very high resources, then they're still under a bit of strain, but not as much, but they're highly motivated because they've got the resources, they've got the people behind them to make that happen. As against people with low demands, who have low resources, well, there's no stress, no strain, but there's very average motivation, as against someone low strain but lots of resources and therefore high motivation. So again, each of these, we need to identify what the job demands are of each person we're dealing with within our team. How do we address those job demands in relation to, are we not putting enough demand on them and we should be moving them up a bit, or are we not providing the right resources and being able to give them possible resources and a demand that gives them the satisfaction they want and the motivation they want. This all comes down then to this model, which is basically saying that there are 4 major ingredients in relation to the strategy and deriving and the principles of the organisational performance, and those 4 things are, the culture, the structures, the people, and the work. And what we're trying to understand is that these all need to be related in somehow, so that when we're doing our strategy in respect to each of these things, we need to look at, say, okay, in relation to culture or the structure, how's our culture relating to that? How do we bring it back and analyse each element separately, but then be able to say, okay, how do we then look at them collectively and how do they relate? Because I've seen situations where companies have gone into strategy and developed their culture and said, okay, we have a culture of honesty, and then they've gone back into the workplace, and I've seen in one company they had a situation where someone overpaid, and one of the staff members came along and said, well, should I send back a cheque and refund it? And the owner said, no, leave it there until they ask for it. So all of a sudden this culture of being honest has flown out, the structures start to fall down, people start to say, well, what's all this culture about? It doesn't work, and so performance starts to fall off. There's got to be this connection of all of this stuff, all of these areas of the business to make the whole thing work. It's really important that we get that approach right, and we work very diligently at trying to make sure this all works. So when I've done all that with my staff in the past, and what I've looked at and gone through those various tools of their skills areas, their demand areas, and so on, I develop a 1-page plan for each staff member, and I look clearly and say, okay, where do I see that staff member now? Where do they see themselves now? Where do we want them to be? And in relation to that, then how are we going to measure whether they actually achieve that? And then from those other tools where we've looked at their various skill levels, demands, and so on, certain strategies came out of that. So those major strategies goes in the strategy area. We start developing some action plans. We put down who's responsible for those and some timing, and we start to monitor that. So that the 1-page plan starts to become the working tool that we start to look at that coaching and development and training of our staff members, and just seeing where they're going and how we do that. So we do the 1-page plan for each person. We get the key strategies from the tools. We review the minimum monthly measurements that we're looking at, and as we start to develop and get things moving, we cross off those strategies that we've achieved and start putting on new ones. So it's very much about the providing the training support to overcome the hurdles they have. So looking at each person individually and trying to then tailor for those people to get them going and coaching and developing those people. I guess if I can recommend that you go have a read of a book called The Multipliers, because it looks at why do some leaders amplify intelligence while others drain it, and it looks at the distinguishing between a diminisher and a multiplier, and a diminisher being a person who just feels other people won't figure it out without me, so I've got to be able to do it. And so I'm the empire builder. I hoard and underutilize the talent because I need to do it. I create the stress that stops them thinking. I tell people what to do. I decide for them, and so on. So they're very much a diminisher. They really take control and don't let people use their talents and abilities and so on. Whereas the multiplier looks at people and say they are smart and they can figure it out for themselves. So I can, by being that way, I attract and optimize my talent. I create space for the best thinking and allow them to think and come up with ideas. I extend them and stretch their challenges. I debate with them and help them to make the decisions. So they're two very different ways of running your business and helping your people. So what are you? Are you a diminisher or are you a multiplier? Get the book. It's a great book. So in summary, you need to move from a high performer to a head coach. You've got to change your ability to say, okay, I'm the one who does everything and I'm out there doing it all, to become a head coach and train and teach people. Because if you're looking to that succession plan in the future and so on, it may be that those employees are the ones who are going to be that succession plan, and you've got to train them and build them up and get them to that position to be able to do that. So plot your team members on the coaching matrix. Look at where they are. Reflect on the tools to overcome the hurdles. Start doing the strategies that come out of those tools. Manage their performance on a regular basis, preferably monthly, and be a multiplier, not a diminisher. Get the maximum productivity out of your people. Get them working for you. The Toyota company many years ago developed what they call the 7 waste, and which was all about overproduction and movement and transport and all those sort of things. But there was an 8th waste that needed to be brought into it, and that was the underutilization of the team and trying to get far better, more creativity out of their team. So you need to really look at that. I thank you. Is there any questions that anyone has of what we've spoken about? I have taped this session, and we'll put that tape and send it to everybody within the next couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great.
Thanks, Simon. No questions? If you haven't got any questions at the moment, but you may have something later on, please feel free to give me a call, and I'm quite happy to discuss it with you. Or if you haven't been able to download those documents, again, let me know and I'll make sure that you get those. And if you need any help in working with those, let me know and I'll give you a hand.
Will do.
Thank you. No other questions? Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.